Hi, my name is Fiona Bennett, 32 years old, and if there is one moment in my life when I truly felt abandoned, it was the day my parents chose to spend $100,000 on a lavish wedding for my sister Emily instead of saving my life. It sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? But it is the truth. I was carrying a dangerous illness inside me, and the doctors had repeatedly stressed that I needed surgery immediately, without delay, because every day that passed brought me closer to death. I had gathered everything I had run everywhere searching for solutions, and in the end, with the last fragile bit of hope I still held, I turned back to beg my parents, the people who were supposed to be my final and safest refuge. Yet, what I received in return for my pleas were only indifferent eyes, cold stares, and an emotionless explanation. We already spent all the savings on Emily's wedding. Canceling would mean losing it all. You'll have to handle it yourself, Fiona. I will never forget that moment. The glow of the screen lighting up my mother's face, while I was trying desperately to hold on to the last shred of dignity I had left as I begged for my life. More painful than the shadow of death itself was the realization that I was never important in my own family. And now, as I tell you this story, I want to ask you, those of you listening to me from the other side of the screen, where are you watching from? And if you were in my place, when your own parents valued a wedding party above your very life, what would you do? Share your thoughts with us in the comments. As I sit here looking back on the years that have passed, perhaps the thing that breaks my heart the most is not the illness, not even the life or death surgery, but the long, endless childhood spent feeling like nothing more than a shadow in my own home. From a very young age, I realized that the house I grew up in was more like a shrine built in Emily's name. Every wall was covered with shining certificates, photos of my sister in her ballet costumes, and framed pictures of her seated at the piano under bright stage lights. The living room, the hallway, even the dining room, wherever your eyes landed, Emily's face was always there. Polished medals hung neatly on shelves, trophies stood proudly on cabinets, as if in our home there was only one daughter worthy of pride. And what about me? I pushed myself in my studies, I joined school activities, I consistently earned high grades and achieved accomplishments that were far from ordinary. I even worked part-time jobs from an early age so I could buy my own books and pay for extracurricular classes. Yet none of that was ever enough to earn recognition from my parents. I still remember the day I received a full scholarship to university, an achievement that any parent would normally boast about with pride, and all I got from mine was a short, dry text. Yeah, good. Keep trying. No celebratory meal, no congratulatory hug, not even a single photo to capture that milestone. Meanwhile, a simple consolation prize from Emily's district-level piano competition was enough for my parents to take her to a photo studio, print an oversized portrait, frame it in gold, and hang it right in the center of the living room. That favoritism repeated itself so many times that I gradually grew numb to it, yet there were still moments when it cut deep into my heart. I remember one evening in 10th grade, when I rushed home from school, my heart pounding with excitement because I had just been selected for the debate team. To me, it was an honor, the result of countless late nights spent reading and practicing my presentation skills. I ran straight into the kitchen, where my mother was preparing dinner, and exclaimed, "Mom, Dad, today I was chosen for the school's debate team." I was hoping for at least a proud look, maybe a warm congratulations. But my mother only glanced up for a second and said flatly, "That's good. But your sister has a piano recital tonight, make sure you take some pictures for her." I froze in place, forcing a smile while my heart quietly shattered inside. That was the moment I truly understood that no matter what I achieved, in my parents' eyes I would always remain just a faint shadow next to the spotlight they had built around Emily. My parent-teacher meetings were always short and rushed. My parents would sit for only a few minutes before hurrying off to make it to Emily's dance class or piano lesson. I slowly realized I was never a priority in their schedule. I lived under the same roof, yet it felt as though I was forgotten in some dark corner, while the laughter and the light were always directed toward someone else. If you grew up in a family where love was never shared equally, you would understand the bitter ache of watching your parents beam with excitement over every step, every note, every move your sibling made, while your own accomplishments were brushed aside with nothing more than a half-hearted nod. It was from those years that I learned how to swallow my tears, how to smile while my heart quietly bled, and how to stop expecting anything from my parents because I knew that placing hope in them would only bring me deeper pain. After graduating from high school, I knew with absolute certainty that I could not rely on any help from my parents. Every small amount I had managed to save from part-time jobs throughout those school years became the only lifeline that allowed me to continue pursuing my education. I received a partial scholarship to a university in Chicago, but it only covered part of the tuition. The rest was a number far too large for me to afford at that time. While my friends eagerly packed their suitcases, preparing to step into college life with their parents' support behind them, I sat alone in my small room, hunched over job applications, combing through every classified ad in the newspaper. I knew that if I didn't stand on my own 2 feet, my dream of going to college would end at the acceptance letter. That summer before my first semester, I began working full-time at a small coffee shop. By day, I stood behind the counter brewing drinks, wiping down tables, scrubbing floors, and even hauling bags of coffee beans heavier than myself. At night, I worked another shift at a convenience store near the dorms, standing at the register until midnight. Many nights I returned to my room, sat at my desk, and watched my vision blur from exhaustion, but I still forced myself to read a few pages, because I knew knowledge was the only ticket out of a life of disregard. Meanwhile, all I had to do was glance at Emily to see a world completely opposite to mine. She had her tuition fully covered by my parents at a prestigious private school, where the yearly tuition equaled 3 years of my back-breaking labor. On top of that, Emily had her own car, her own apartment, and every time she returned home she carried bags of expensive things. My parents proudly boasted about their precious daughter to neighbors and relatives, while my existence hardly seemed worth mentioning. There were days when I would leave class and head straight to the hospital, where I worked night shifts as a nurse assistant. The job was grueling. Changing patients' bandages, pushing wheelchairs, checking rooms, cleaning medical equipment. Sometimes the shift stretched to 12 hours, and the next morning I had to rush to class with dark circles under my eyes. Yet, strangely enough, in that hospital, amid the smell of disinfectant and the steady beeping of monitors, I discovered something I had never once found in my own home. Genuine care. My colleagues from doctors to orderlies treated me like a younger sibling, like part of a family. They knew I was always overworking myself to balance both study and work, so they often quietly stepped in to help. There were days when I fell asleep in the break room, and the head nurse would quietly place a hot cup of coffee beside me. Once, when I had a fever but still forced myself to work, the doctor on duty sent me back to my dorm to rest and even dropped off medicine for me. It was those strangers who became my real family. They didn't need to share my bloodline, they didn't need the titles of parent or sibling, yet they gave me the feeling that I mattered, that my existence was worthy of care. While Emily lived in luxury with everything laid out for her, I struggled through each day. But it was that very struggle that taught me how to stand firm, how to recognize what true love looks like, and what is merely an empty facade. I began to understand that sometimes family is not where you are born, but where people are willing to reach out and catch you when you fall. And for me, that hospital where I worked the night shifts became my second home, the place where I knew that if I ever collapsed one day, at least there would be people who truly cared whether I lived or died. The years of exhausting work alongside my studies finally bore fruit. After graduation, I was offered a full-time position at a major medical center in Chicago. From a night shift nurse assistant, I gradually earned trust and was assigned responsibilities in patient management and shift coordination. For the first time in my life, I felt I truly had a place, not only in my work but in society itself. I began to earn a stable income, enough to rent a small but cozy apartment of my own, and, more importantly, I felt as though I was finally breaking free from the shadow of the past, the shadow that had always made me believe I was nothing more than an unwanted presence in my own family. But life has its cruel way of testing people precisely when they think everything is finally moving in the right direction. At first, it was just passing fatigue. I thought it was nothing more than the natural consequence of years of overwork. I often found myself short of breath after climbing a few flights of stairs, and sometimes a sharp pain would grip my chest as if someone were squeezing it tight. I blamed it on too little sleep, on irregular meals. But then one day, during a shift, while helping a patient move from the bed to a wheelchair, my heart suddenly raced out of rhythm, my breath caught, and my vision went black. I collapsed on the floor right in front of everyone. When I regained consciousness, I was lying in the emergency ward of the very hospital where I worked, my chest wired with monitors, the sound of rapid beeping ringing in my ears. After a series of tests, the cardiologist walked into my room holding a thick folder. He sat down beside my bed, his voice both firm and gentle. "Fiona, your heart condition is very serious. Your main heart valve is severely damaged, and if you don't undergo open heart surgery to replace it within the next few weeks, the risk of heart failure and sudden death is extremely high." Hearing those words, my entire body froze. In that moment, all the plans and fragile hopes I had been trying to build seemed to collapse. I was only 29, my career was just beginning to flourish. Why did fate have to hand me a death sentence so soon? As the doctor continued explaining the treatment plan, my mind was spinning. The cost of open heart surgery, combined with hospitalization and the recovery period afterward, was estimated at nearly $120,000. I repeated that number in my head over and over, trying to convince myself I had misheard. $120,000 for some, it may just be numbers on paper, but for me, it was an insurmountable wall. No matter how many extra shifts I worked, no matter how tightly I saved every penny, there was no possible way I could gather that kind of money in the short window of time the doctor had given me. What made it worse was knowing that my health insurance was almost completely depleted. In the past years, I had already used much of it on smaller treatments, and the basic coverage provided by the hospital did not include this kind of specialized surgery. I tried reaching out to private insurance companies, but the response was always the same, cold and detached. "We're sorry. Your condition is considered pre-existing and does not fall within our coverage." Each call ended in despair, and every time I hung up, it felt as if another knife had pierced my chest. I once believed I was strong. I once believed that with hard work and persistence, there was nothing I couldn't overcome. But when faced with the figure of $120,000, all that pride crumbled. Every night I lay awake, listening to the disordered rhythm of my heart, each beat a cruel reminder that my time was running out. There were moments I asked myself if this was the end, if I was destined to leave this world quietly, with no one to care beyond a few close colleagues. What terrified me most was not death itself, but the thought of leaving without ever once being truly valued by my parents, without ever being loved the way they so freely loved Emily. While I was tearing my hair out, searching desperately for a way to survive, Emily's lavish wedding photos began flooding social media. A custom-designed gown, a 5-star hotel tasting event, invitations embossed with gold patterns. I looked at the numbers my parents had spent on that wedding, and it felt like my heart was bleeding. A frivolous celebration, lasting only a few hours, was worth more to them than my very life. And so, in my despair, I realized I had only one path left. To cast aside the pride that had already been trampled for years and go to my parents to beg for help. I remember that fateful afternoon with painful clarity, the moment I decided to put my pride aside and return to my parents' house. In my hands was a thick folder stuffed with hospital documents, diagnostic results, the estimated cost of surgery, prescriptions, and the doctor's urgent recommendation letter. I clutched it so tightly that my palms were soaked with sweat, my heart pounding so wildly it felt like it might rip through my fragile chest. The house was not unfamiliar, yet every step I took along the brick path toward the front door weighed heavy, as if I were walking into a courtroom where I already knew there would be no justice for me. My parents sat in the living room, on a leather sofa still gleaming like new. The coffee table in front of them was piled with wedding magazines, thick catalogs of bridal gowns, all displaying brides with radiant smiles. When I placed the folder on the table, the sound was so heavy it seemed it could rattle the wine glass my mother was holding. I trembled as I began to speak, my words catching in my throat. The doctors said I need open-heart surgery within the next few weeks, otherwise, I might not survive. This is the full cost. I've tried everything I can, but I can't cover it all on my own. I stopped, drew in a deep breath, and looked straight at my parents, searching for even the faintest flicker of concern, some sign of love. But all I saw was a quick glance exchanged between them, a look I knew too well from childhood, a silent look that carried an unspoken agreement. My father cleared his throat, then spoke with the firmness of someone declaring an obvious fact. "Fiona, we can't help you. We already put down $50,000 as a deposit for Emily's wedding. If we cancel, we lose everything. You'll have to handle it yourself." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. I leaned forward, my voice trembling. "Are you telling me that my life is worth less than a wedding party? Less than the pictures Emily is going to post on Instagram?" I saw my mother's hand flinch slightly, but she kept her tone soft, almost lulling, as though she were soothing a child. "Fiona, this isn't just a party. This is Emily's big day. She's been waiting her whole life for this. We can't let it be ruined." I laughed, but it was not laughter filled with joy, it was bitter, choking. "And what about me? I only have one life too. Is Emily's big day more important than whether I live or die?" My father frowned, his voice cold and sharp as steel. "Stop being dramatic. You're smart, you'll figure it out. You always do, don't you?" Those words froze me to my core. For years, they had grown accustomed to me taking care of myself, so much so that even my survival had become, in their eyes, nothing more than another challenge I was expected to overcome on my own. I sat in silence, my gaze slowly moving around the room as though I were truly seeing it for the first time. Photos of Emily in her ballet costumes, Emily receiving awards, Emily smiling brightly in the arms of our parents everywhere. And me, not a trace. I drew in a long, steady breath, then spoke slowly, each word slicing through the air. "I could die. I am not asking for money for a car or an apartment. This is about survival. And you've chosen to abandon me just to keep Emily's wedding perfect. From this day forward, I will never forget that choice." My mother set her wine glass down on the table, her hand trembling slightly, but then she forced herself to appear calm. "Don't make everything so dramatic, Fiona. You can look for another hospital, you can arrange a payment plan. You've always been strong, and we believe you'll get through this." I looked her straight in the eye and said bitterly, "Believe I'll get through it, or believe that if I don't, at least you won't have to be burdened? Because clearly, in this house, I have never been the priority." The air in the room grew so thick and heavy that I could barely breathe. I stood up, my legs shaking as though they couldn't hold me, but I forced myself to stand tall. As I opened the door, I turned back for one last look. My parents were still sitting there, calm and composed, as if the conversation we just had been nothing more than a negotiation over event expenses. Their eyes showed none of the fear or concern of parents who had just refused to save their daughter's life. In that moment, I realized a brutal truth. To them, I had never mattered and I never would. I walked out, leaving behind a brightly lit house that had never once shone its light on me. And on that walk back, through the skin-cutting cold of the Chicago wind, I promised myself, if they had chosen Emily and her wedding over me, then from this moment on, I would never beg them again. I left that house numb, my heart crushed not only by the illness tearing at me but by the very people who were supposed to be my last refuge. Yet when that door closed behind me, another one opened in the place I least expected. The hospital. The place I had always thought of as just work suddenly became my true family. I remember that night clearly. I returned to my shift late, sitting quietly in the break room with the thick folder of medical documents still in my hands. I didn't cry, I didn't complain, I just sat in silence so deep that even my colleagues immediately sensed something was wrong. Mark, a young doctor on the same shift, sat down beside me, gently pulled the papers from my hands, and began reading. Within minutes, the whole break room was buzzing. Everyone passed the diagnosis around, their eyes heavy with concern. And then, something miraculous began to happen. They didn't ask why my parents hadn't helped, they didn't blame me for ending up in this desperate situation. Instead, they immediately began figuring out how I could survive. The very next day, they began to take action. The head nurse organized a blood drive fundraiser at the hospital. Doctors volunteered to pay out of their own pockets to print flyers calling for donations. The orderlies and administrative staff gathered together to plan a food sale in the main lobby, everything from homemade cookies and coffee to boxed lunches. I stood there, watching my colleagues, after enduring long, exhausting shifts, still rolling up their sleeves with energy to sell each cookie, each cup of coffee, and my throat tightened so much I could hardly speak. They owed me nothing, yet they chose to stand by me when I needed it most. As for me, I couldn't just sit still either. I began selling everything I owned. My only car, old and worn, but the one that had carried me to work and school for years, was sold. My laptop, the one I had used since college to write late-night essays, had to go as well. Piece by piece, I gathered my belongings, my keepsakes, the things I once thought I could never live without, and exchanged them for a chance to keep living. Each time I signed the papers to sell something, it felt like I was peeling away little fragments of my life. But I knew that in the end, they were only material things. The only things truly worth keeping were my breath, my heartbeat, my chance at survival. And then, in those days of despair, an unexpected light appeared. The head of the cardiology department, Dr. Richard Hayes, a man in his 60s, stern but kind, called me into his office. He sat there, his eyes fixed on me for a long while before speaking. "Fiona, I lost my wife to heart disease. She passed away because we couldn't afford the surgery. I know the helplessness you're feeling. I won't let you walk that road alone." Then he picked up the phone and called a medical charity he had worked with before. He explained my condition, handed over my entire file, and personally vouched for me. Just a few days later, the charity agreed to cover a portion of the expenses, a sum large enough that, combined with the money raised by my colleagues and friends, was enough for me to finally schedule my surgery. The moment I signed the papers to schedule the surgery, my hands were still trembling, unable to believe that I had been given a chance to survive. And fate, in its cruel irony, played a trick almost too sharp to bear. The date the doctors set for my operation fell exactly on the same day as Emily's lavish wedding. While my sister walked down the aisle in a pristine white gown under the glittering lights of a five-star hotel, I lay on an operating table, my chest split open, my heart connected to machines while surgeons worked to repair it. Two worlds, entirely different, one filled with fireworks, champagne, and glamorous Instagram photos, the other with harsh surgical lights and a fragile life hanging by a thread. When I woke after the surgery, I was so weak I could hardly move. But I was alive. My heart beat again, slow but steady, like a song announcing that I had been given another chance. By my bedside, there were no parents, no Emily, but there were colleagues taking turns to watch over me, Dr. Hayes holding my hand with words of encouragement, and friends bringing warm soup and gentle wishes. I realized then that sometimes family is not where you are born, but where you are chosen, and where others choose you in return, not because of bloodlines, but because of genuine love. In that moment, through the sharp pain of the incision and the weight of weakness pressing over me, I knew I had just been reborn. And from that point forward, a new Fiona began to take shape, not the abandoned daughter in her parents' home, but an independent woman who knew her worth. Determined to use this second life to prove they were wrong when they decided my existence was worth less than a wedding celebration. The moment I woke up after surgery felt like a rebirth, but the road ahead was anything but easy. The incision on my chest sent sharp waves of pain through every small movement. Even a deep breath felt like knives cutting into my ribcage. The doctors warned me that recovery could take nearly a year, and indeed, that stretch of time was the greatest trial of my life. Day after day, I had to relearn how to breathe, starting with the simplest exercises, lifting a small rubber ball, taking a few steps down the hospital hallway. I had once been someone who could work 12-hour shifts, juggle 3 jobs at once, yet now, if I stood for more than 5 minutes, sweat poured from me like rain and my heart pounded uncontrollably. Many nights I lay awake, my pillow wet with tears, terrified that I would never again have the strength to live a normal life. And yet, every morning when I woke and still heard the sound of my heartbeat, I whispered to myself, I am alive, and as long as I am alive, there is still a chance. Abu. Instead of sinking into self-pity, I chose to use my recovery time to learn. While I couldn't throw myself into shifts as before, I sat in my room, in front of my old computer, and enrolled in online courses in healthcare management, hospital finance, and project administration. At first, the lessons felt dry and overwhelming, but the more I studied, the more I realized this was a new door opening for me. I began to understand that beyond caring for patients directly, I could also help change the healthcare system itself if I learned how to organize, coordinate, and manage effectively. Each lecture, each online discussion, felt like a brick laid in the foundation of my new future. And for the first time, I realized that being abandoned in the past had taught me something invaluable. I had no one to lean on, so I had no choice but to lean on myself and the knowledge I built. 1 year later, when my health had finally stabilized, an unexpected offer came my way. A corporation specializing in building and managing healthcare facilities in New York, where Dr. Hayes had connections, invited me to join as a project coordinator for a new hospital. I still remember the way my heart raced when I received that call, not out of fear of illness, but out of pure joy. I, Fiona, the daughter once dismissed and overlooked in my own home, was now being entrusted with responsibility on a major project. I packed my suitcase and headed to New York, the city that never sleeps, to begin an entirely new journey. The work at the corporation was anything but easy. I had to oversee construction schedules, monitor budgets, and coordinate between medical staff and engineering teams. Yet instead of feeling crushed by the pressure, I felt as if I had finally found water to swim in. The years I had spent working in hospitals, combined with the knowledge I had gained from my studies, gave me an insight that many in the construction field lacked. Every detail of a healthcare facility is tied directly to a patient's survival. I knew exactly how bright an operating room needed to be, how wide a hallway had to stretch for an emergency stretcher to turn, how close a recovery room should be to a nurse's station so doctors could respond in time. I became the bridge between two worlds, and gradually, from a project coordinator, I was entrusted with more and more responsibilities until eventually I rose to become a project director for large-scale medical facilities. The work kept me so busy that at times I lost track of time, but my heart no longer beat for myself alone. I still remembered the quiet promise I made during those nights in a hospital bed. If I lived, I would repay those who had once reached out to save me. And so, alongside my career, I began building a personal fund. At first, it was just a small group at my old hospital pooling money to help poor patients afford their medicine. Later, I expanded the effort, organizing fundraising events, calling on businesses to sponsor, and using my new network in the industry to connect charities and nonprofits. Together, we built a program dedicated to supporting patients with congenital heart conditions and those in dire financial need. Each time I saw a struggling patient saved through the fund's support, I saw a reflection of my younger self. I saw again the desperate Fiona clutching a folder of medical papers, begging her parents for help. But this time, I was able to look into someone's eyes and say, "We'll help you. You're not alone." That wasn't just an act of gratitude, it was my way of affirming my worth. That I hadn't just survived, but was living to make a difference. I wanted the world to know that a daughter once abandoned could grow to become someone who saved hundreds, even thousands of lives. Whether my parents ever heard of those successes, I cannot say, and I do not know if they ever felt proud. But to me, it no longer mattered. I had stepped out of Emily's shadow, broken free from the endless cycle of favoritism and abandonment. I carried a heart that had once been shattered, but it had been stitched back together not only by a surgeon's scalpel, but by resilience and the love of strangers who chose to care for me. From that moment forward, I knew that whatever difficulties came my way, I would face them head-on, because I had already proven that my true worth never depended on my parents' recognition. My life in New York flourished. One successful hospital project followed another, and my reputation in the field of healthcare construction steadily grew. I worked tirelessly, and each time I stood before a newly completed facility, watching patients receive treatment in a safe, modern space, I felt my heart once so wounded beat with pride. I believed the painful past and my parents' abandonment had been left behind for good. But fate had its own way of bringing them back into my life, in a way I never could have anticipated. Years later, I heard from an old acquaintance in Chicago that my parents had been swept up in a real estate frenzy. At that time, the market was booming, and everyone believed quick fortunes were within reach. My father, always eager to boast and chase prestige, listened to his wealthy club friends and poured their entire savings, even their retirement fund, into so-called guaranteed win projects. My mother, as always, offered no opposing voice. She remained fixated on maintaining a polished image for the family in the eyes of others. But the dream of easy riches quickly turned into a nightmare. The market crashed, the projects defaulted, and their lifetime of savings evaporated within months. Even the once proud family home was placed on the bank's foreclosure list. In their desperation, my parents did what they had always believed in. They turned to their savior, Emily. By then, my sister was married to a wealthy lawyer, living in a luxurious suburban home, driving an expensive car, and hosting lavish parties. My parents clung to the hope that their golden daughter, the one they had poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into for tuition, wedding gowns, apartments, and vacations, would welcome them with open arms, or, at the very least, provide the financial lifeline they needed to survive the crisis. But reality was colder than the harshest Chicago winter. They told me through tears that on that day, they had dragged their suitcases to Emily's house and knocked on the door. It was my brother-in-law, the man my parents had once adored as their perfect son, because of his status, who answered. He didn't invite them in, didn't offer a single word of comfort. He stood squarely in the doorway, his voice dry and final. "We cannot let your financial troubles affect the future of our children. Here is the business card of a bankruptcy lawyer. Contact him. I'm sorry, but we cannot help." And with that, he slammed the door shut in their faces, leaving my parents frozen on the doorstep in the bitter cold. From the upstairs window, Emily only lifted the curtain for a moment, glanced down at them, and then let it fall again as though nothing had ever happened. I was silent as I heard that detail. The daughter they had favored so much that they once placed her wedding above my life now turned them away without hesitation. I wasn't surprised, but still, a sharp ache spread through my chest. Because in that instant, I realized their downfall was not only the result of reckless investments, but of their blind devotion, pouring all their love, expectations, and wealth into a daughter who had never learned how to appreciate it. They had sown those seeds for years, and now they were reaping the bitter harvest. A few days later, my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen, but something in me knew it was them. When I answered, my mother's voice came through, choked and trembling on the edge of sobs. "Fiona, we're in serious trouble. The bank is about to seize the house. We need you. Please, help your parents just this once. We only need $50,000 to keep the house, and then we'll handle the rest." I sat frozen, the phone pressed to my ear, my mind spinning as though hurled back in time. I remembered the moment I had sat in their living room, laying down my hospital folder, begging for my life, only to hear those cold words. "We already put $50,000 down for Emily's wedding. You'll have to handle it yourself, Fiona." And now, here they were, needing that exact same amount not to save my life, but to save a house. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the memories crash over me like a flood. That day, they had chosen a wedding over me. They had left me to face death alone, while fussing over every little detail of Emily's lavish celebration. And now, with Emily turning them away and all their glittering illusions stripped bare, they suddenly remembered me, the daughter they had pushed aside as if I had never existed. The feeling was painful and bitter, but more than anything, it revealed a truth. Fate had turned its wheel and brought my parents back to face the consequences they had earned. I didn't respond to my mother's desperate call right away. Instead, I turned off my phone and sat quietly in my office high above the city, gazing out at the glowing lights of New York. Each light reminded me that I had fought through death itself to stand where I was, and I hadn't done it because of my parents, but because of colleagues and strangers who had chosen to walk beside me. For many nights, I thought it over until I reached a decision. If my parents truly wanted an answer from me, I wouldn't just give it in words, I would let them witness it with their own eyes. I invited them to meet me at the largest healthcare project I was overseeing, a modern, multimillion-dollar general hospital, now in its final stages of construction. That morning, I arrived early at the site. The air was crisp, the sunlight bouncing off newly installed glass panels, still streaked with dust but gleaming brightly. I stood there in a hard hat and fitted blazer, holding a thick binder of project plans. When my parents appeared, they looked far more worn than the polished image I remembered. My father wore a frayed coat, my mother clutched an outdated handbag. Their faces were etched with deep worry lines, their eyes hollow from sleepless nights. They were no longer the powerful, proud couple of grand parties and prestige, but two desperate people clinging to a fragile thread. As they looked around the construction site, awe flickered across their faces. The massive building towered above them, with hundreds of workers bustling, machines roaring, the atmosphere alive with purpose. I stepped out from the temporary office to face them. My father cleared his throat, straining to recover a trace of his old authority. "Fiona, thank you for giving us the chance to meet. We don't want to trouble you, we only need your help this one time. The house, it's the only thing we have left." I looked them straight in the eyes, not flinching, my voice steady and deliberate, each word falling like the strike of a hammer. "Back then, $80,000 could have saved my life. You chose a wedding dress instead. Today, $50,000 could save your house. My answer is, number." My mother burst into tears immediately, her shoulders shaking, tears streaming down her face. She clasped her hands together, her voice broken and pleading. "Fiona, you can't do this. We are family. No matter what, you are still our daughter." She spoke as if invoking the word family could erase everything that had happened. I stepped closer, my eyes cold but resolute. "Family? Family doesn't abandon you when you need them most. When I begged for my life, you turned your backs. The ones who saved me were colleagues and friends, people with no blood ties to me, but who sold their cars, their belongings, stayed up nights fundraising so I could live. They are my family, and you? You chose flowers over my heart, you chose parties over your own daughter's life. Oh." My father's face flushed red, yet he still tried to cling to his commanding tone. "Don't exaggerate, you survived, didn't you? You're successful today because of the toughness we instilled in you." I laughed a sharp, bitter laugh. "Instilled in me? Leaving me to starve, to die sick, and then using that abandonment as proof that I'm stronger? If it hadn't been for strangers reaching out to save me, I wouldn't be standing here today listening to you spew such shameless words." Howard too. The air grew heavy, filled only with the grinding roar of drills. Nearby workers had paused, their tools stilled, watching us with eyes full of curiosity and quiet confusion. They didn't know the whole story, but from the sight of me standing tall in my manager's attire against the two weary figures before me, they could see the balance of power had shifted completely. I drew a deep breath, then turned my back on them, my voice carrying across the construction site. "When I needed you, you told me, you're smart, you'll figure it out. Now I'll give you the exact same answer. Figure it out yourselves, because I am no one's lifeline anymore." My mother collapsed to the ground, covering her face as sobs racked her body. My father still tried to hold on, his voice strained. "Fiona, we're old now, we have nowhere else to go. You can't leave us out on the street like this." I stopped, turned my head, my gaze sharp as a blade. "And when I begged for every dollar to save my life, did you ever think that if you refused, I'd have nowhere to go? You still sipped your wine, ordered flowers, hired a band. So today, don't expect me to shed tears over your house. That was your choice, and this is mine. With that, I turned and walked back into the office. In the glass door, I caught the reflection behind me. My mother crumpled on the concrete floor, my father standing frozen, his face flushed red, surrounded by workers in hard hats who looked at them as if they were strangers. No one saw them as the glamorous couple they once were. To everyone here, they were nothing more than two failures, begging from the daughter they had once abandoned. And to me, it was the fairest sentence fate could have delivered. After that morning, I never saw my parents again. News of them only reached me through old acquaintances in Chicago, and each fragment sounded like another chapter in a tragic novel. The house that had once been their pride, the place of parties and endless boasting about their golden daughter Emily, was finally seized by the bank. My parents were forced to move out within days, selling off what little they had, which wasn't even enough to rent a decent place. Their glittering lives ended in long nights spent in a cheap motel, in a damp room with stained walls and a creaking bed. Acquaintances told me that sometimes they were seen sitting silently in fast food restaurants, ordering a single small meal to split, their faces etched with exhaustion and unmistakable defeat. And Emily? She continued to live in her own world of luxury, seemingly indifferent to our parents. Her brightly lit mansion in the suburbs still pulsed with music during weekend parties, still echoed with the laughter of her wealthy friends. People said Emily even told them openly that her parents only brought trouble, that she couldn't allow them to tarnish her reputation. The irony was sharp. My parents had poured every ounce of love, money, and expectation into Emily, and in the end, when they lost everything, she was the very first to slam the door in their faces. Meanwhile, my life in New York kept blossoming. The largest hospital project I had ever managed was finally completed, praised in the press as an architectural landmark of the city. I was also preparing for a new chapter of my life, building a family of my own. The man I love does not see me through the lens of my past, nor measure my worth by my achievements, but simply cherishes me for who I truly am. We are now expecting a baby, and for the first time in my life, I can imagine a home filled with love without conditions, without favoritism, a home where every child is held close and listened to. Looking back on the road I've traveled, I no longer see myself as just a victim. I see a journey of rebirth. From the abandoned daughter, I have become a woman who can create her own worth not only through professional success, but through the love I choose to give. I have kept the promise I once whispered in that hospital bed: if I lived, I would repay. My fund to support poor patients has grown stronger, giving dozens the chance to undergo surgery, the chance to live on. Each time I see their smiles after recovery, I feel as though another part of my own heart has been healed. And this is the message I want to leave with those of you listening to my story. When your own family abandons you, remember that you can still create a true family out of those who love you unconditionally. Blood ties do not always mean love, and sometimes strangers are the ones most willing to reach out when you fall. Do not let yourself remain trapped in toxicity just because of the word family. Real love never comes with comparison, favoritism, or conditions. If there is one lesson I've learned, it is this. Sometimes cutting off toxic relationships is not selfish, it is saving yourself. I once believed that turning my back on my parents would make me unfilial. But now I understand that the greatest betrayal is not refusing to sacrifice irrationally, it is allowing yourself to be worn down, to be destroyed piece by those who were supposed to protect you. They may call me ungrateful, but I call it freedom. And today, as my heart beats strongly within my chest, I know I was right. I saved myself, and more importantly, I discovered true worth in unconditional love. My story ends here, but perhaps the question remains for you, the one listening right now. Have you ever been abandoned or belittled by your own family? And if so, will you keep holding on, or will you be brave enough to cut ties and save yourself? Share your story and your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again in the next story at this same time tomorrow.